Hello, welcome to the next video in the series for CMI Assignment 704, Developing Organizational Strategy. We're going to be talking through assessment criteria 1.3, which is to discuss the challenges of developing and leading organizational strategy. Um, okay, this says our action word here is discuss, which doesn't sound too bad, does it? So worth a quick check though. So give a detailed account, including a range of views or opinions, which include contrasting perspectives. All right, so this is just like evaluate, isn't it? They've just led us down the river here. Sounds harmless enough, but actually it's evaluate. So we need to look for differing viewpoints around this and make sure that different perspectives are included in our response. So I'm going to do that when I give a couple of examples of how you might approach this. So I've got two notable challenges which you might encounter when it comes to developing or leading strategy. So the first, perhaps a little bit more around developing strategy, perhaps is getting your stakeholders aligned. So strategy is rarely done on your own, unless you're Elon Musk. I talked about him last time. Unless you're Elon Musk, strategy is rarely done on your own. It's normally needs to be a kind of collaborative exercise with different expertise and viewpoints and perspectives. Certainly, at its best, it's that. So but what we going to encounter there is strong personalities with different opinions. If we are bringing into the discussion people from different, I suppose, people with different sets of beliefs and lots of experience, and and particularly if these are people in leadership roles, there's often a little bit of narcissism in there, isn't there? So you're going to be bringing all that. So when we've got people with strongly held views, getting alignment or agreement might not be straightforward. We might also find that there's differing levels of buy-in and commitment. So it's one thing to have the discussion, but then if you need people to actually do a bit of work, that's a different question. And I think that I've certainly observed, sort of when committees come together, it can be a bit of a talking shop, and then a meeting finishes and you go back to work and nothing happens. And it's usually because people aren't really bought in enough to commit time to it. So you can have a good positive conversation, but then it just sort of just sort of disappears into a black hole. So you might find that there's differing levels of commitment and willingness to do the work from your stakeholders. And also, of course, if you are stepping into a role or an organization that's been around for a while, there may be traditions, historical norms to overcome. So the way that we've always done things around here can be a barrier to developing a strategy. It's like that thing. I remember reading somewhere 101 ways to kill a good idea, and it's but what you will often hear from people is, "Oh, we've already tried that," or "We're already on with that," or "Yeah, don't worry, we tried that and it didn't work." That's we're just going around in circles. All of that sort of stuff that people say. Um, Actually, of course, when you dig into that, you haven't tried it before, or if you did, the world's very different now. And actually, that we're just getting on with it. We're already doing that. That challenge. Well, actually, when you dig into it and you start talking to people, you find out that no one agrees, and we're definitely not getting on with it. You actually find that these are kind of cunning little strategies to kill a good idea. So yeah, so getting your team stakeholders aligned can be fiendishly difficult. Here's an interesting little example, and this was a big one, culture change. I talk a lot about Microsoft. I think it's really interesting business, and how if you go back 10 years or so pre-2014, Microsoft was in the doldrums. Commercial performance was acceptable rather than great. I think it turned over about $80 billion a year, so we didn't need to worry about it. But it wasn't on par with Google and the kind of the really fast moving social media giants. So it wasn't really considered to be a real leading technology business. And the image there is the Windows Phone. Did anybody listening to this buy a Windows Phone? No. There's a reason for that, and it's just because it was old technology, old solutions, and in a fast moving world, trying to solve tomorrow's problems with yesterday's knowledge. It was in a time when Microsoft wanted to shoehorn Windows into everything, and that was because the guys leading the business had all been part of Windows 95 when it really was exciting and game changing. But 20 years later. that was actually really holding them back. But look at where they are now. Power BI, Teams, business communication. Something radical has happened at Microsoft in the last 10 years to get them to where they are now. Genuinely world leaders in corporate IT solutions, business communication, all of that. There might be that Microsoft the biggest business in the world, but they might right up there, and maybe not quite, but they're definitely they're definitely thriving, and we can put it down to culture change. So this is Satya Nadella, who came in 2014, and I'd love to know what really happened. There must have been some difficult conversations. So he kind of rooted out a lot of that old culture, a lot of the kind of people who thought they had all the right answers, that Windows is the solution to all problems. He said, we've got to stop being know-it-alls. We've got to start being learn-it-alls. Always keep learning. You stop doing useful things if you don't learn. It's quite a pointed comment that that he's talking to those slightly out of date and the sort of seasoned execs who were part of the old Microsoft. And so he over several years led this learn it all growth mindset culture and got it into everything. Couple of little blogs and a podcast which talk about this, which are quite good. So we've got one so if you just Google Microsoft introduce a learn it all culture, that'll give you that one. And the YouTube one is called Moonshots, and it's a discussion about growth, how Satya Nadella kind of went about growth mindset. And there's interesting points about, you can say you've really got to walk the talk. How do you change the culture of a complex organization like Microsoft? So yeah, interesting example, I think, and part of it will inevitably involve some of the old culture, people who are real champions of the old culture. They might well move on. It can be you can get quite HRy, I suspect, as you have to move on certain people so that a new culture can grow. Yeah. So challenge one, aligning your stakeholders. I think we're also kind of getting into also getting the culture right for the strategies that you want to introduce. Maybe that's actually another challenge that we could be getting at here. The other challenge, aligned to that for sure, is the challenge of change. So if our strategy involves change, that's difficult. Change is always very disruptive. Some people are very driven by high levels of certainty. Some people feel genuine anxiety around change. There's that personality trait neuroticism. There's a real sensitivity to the unexpected or the uncertain, and potentially quite a lot of alarm to it. So this, I think, this is the change curve, the image there. Really famous little framework, about the kind of quite predictable pattern that people go through when confronted with change or bereavement, or kind of like that kind of significant novel event. So people kind of performance really dips. You can kind of go through what's known as the death valley of change. You can see where it kind of dips into stage 2 there. The death valley of change is where people can kind of really lose their way. And sometimes people leave organizations at this point because they just want things to be back to how they were, and people can feel really destabilized and unhappy in this phase until they start to get into acceptance. It's happened, we have to move forward, we have to begin to experiment. Let's make time for this new way of working or whatever it might be, because we have no choice. And then actually things start to improve quite quickly. Can go both ways though. Definitely not a unidirectional journey, that. So there's a lot to think about in terms of, if this always happens, by the way. I've seen multiple studies on change, and there's always this dip in whatever the y-axis is measuring. Sometimes it's morale, motivation, performance. It's always a dip when you introduce change. So we need to think about the challenge of change management when it comes to new strategies. In terms of different perspectives, you might find is really quite a different view here. So there are the people who, if you like, have come up with the change, the people who own it. It's their vision, their idea. And then there are those who are having the change done to them. They're going to have quite different experiences with change here. So, and again, this can lead to a degree of bias, I think, in our thinking about it. So the people who've kind of developed the change, who've been part of it, who've been part of the conversation, who feel that they have real ownership of it, is their bright idea, essentially. they're on a journey. They're for them, it's an adventure, right? This is an adventure. It's not really too much of a problem. And although there might be a little bit of up and down in terms of performance, as they, actually probably largely driven by other people's resistance to their idea, what you'll probably find is that journey through change. Let me just draw on the little thing here. If you're watching this, you'll see, their journey through change might be a little bit more like that. Say much less of a dip, might be just a little bit of a dip when they find that actually making this happen is really difficult. But they're much closer to acceptance right from the start point because it's their idea. So that's going to be a much more positive viewpoint on this. As I said, it's an adventure. It's not really change. But then people who are having change done to them, who aren't part of the conversation, who are simply having this directed to them, they're going to feel that this is an infringement on their autonomy, that they don't have control, they don't really understand what's happening. They're going to look at, they're going to wonder what the agendas at play are and what this really means for them. It can drive real unhappiness, cynicism, resistance to change. You might see a little bit of terrorism, people deliberately working against it, double booking themselves for meetings. So they're sort of just hoping that it's all going to go away. So at that kind of, so that's where I think we might see more pronounced negative behaviors. So denial, anger, depression, where people feel that this is, outside of their control, and they can get into a bit of a victim mindset about it. And actually, worst case, that death valley of change can go on for an awfully long time before it starts to pick up. And that's bad for the individual, bad for their teams, bad for the business, because no one's being particularly lucrative when they're in that death valley of change. So we want to move people through that as swiftly as possible. Of course, how we do it, when it comes down to really effective communication and making sure that we do, wherever possible, communicate the benefits of the change well to people. Ideally, of course, bring them in before all of this starts, so that there's a genuine dialogue, that people have a stake in what happens, so that we can avoid some of this drama. Of course, that isn't always possible, but if it is, it's definitely a good thing to do. So, yeah, the challenge of change, right? Let me just get rid of my little drawing there. Let me do that. Bear with me. They're all drawings. There we go. So yeah, so that's the second thing to think about. And again, in terms of different perspectives, yeah, you've got the people who own the bright idea, who kind of feel absolutely in control of where this is going because it's coming from them, and then the people who are being subjected to it are going to have very different experiences when it comes to new strategies and the associated change. Little article on the change curve there from Exeter Uni, which is a nice succinct. You can read that in a couple. So back to, as ever, bringing in a bit of your experience. I've given you a couple of examples there, and it's a bit of a conversation about challenges associated with developing and leading strategy. But what have you encountered in your context? What makes leading strategy difficult? I think it's an interesting subject, isn't it? Because you've always got the possibility, well, with particularly a bold strategy, that you might be wrong. That you actually, there's, I think, sort of an element of self-confidence and doubt here at play. That actually, if your strategy is quite innovative and bold and enterprising, you're not doing what everyone else is doing, then there's always things like, well, what happens if we are wrong here? You might be right, but you might not be, and so that, I think, is a challenge. How do you stay self-confident and confidently lead a challenge when it's genuinely innovative? And so that type of thing. And yeah, so what do you think? What have you experienced in your organization in terms of your own challenges associated with introducing new ideas, innovations, or taking people through change? What have you encountered? And please tell that story. Good. So thank you very much. That's another assessment criteria complete. I hope that's been helpful, and see you at the next one.